Hi, everyone. Tonight, I wanted to talk about Moby Dick. In my opinion, Moby Dick is the greatest American novel ever written. It contains the greatest American character ever written, Captain Ahab. Moby Dick I think, was written by Herman Melville, and I think initially, as some scholars have stated, Moby Dick was to be kind of another typical seafaring novel, like a couple of his previous novels, like Omu and Redburn. Um, but after picking up a set of Shakespeare, I believe he was in London and he picked up a set of Shakespeare and he started reading Shakespeare. I believe he also might have picked up a copy of Milton at the time. So, reading Milton's Paradise Lost, that through reading these works, he began to think more deeply about character and about saying something in his novels. He was also influenced by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I think he felt that Nathaniel Hawthorne touched on some deeper topics, perhaps, than what he had up to that point had tackled, and he did dedicate um, Moby Dick to Nathaniel Hawthorne, and they met prior to his writing the book. So I think his meeting with Hawthorne and his reading of reading of Shakespeare and Milton changed the course of what Moby Dick became. So Moby Dick follows Captain Ahab and the crew of the Pequod. And Captain Ahab is a composite of some Shakespearean characters and the one Miltonic character, Satan. So I think the Shakespearean characters that most influence Ahab or influence Melville in creating Ahab are King Lear, Macbeth, and Hamlet. There's probably some Prometheus too in here, um, and that could be from Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound. But then also, I think the greatest influence was probably Milton's Satan. But some, you definitely have threads of Macbeth, King Lear, and Hamlet in Captain Ahab and in Macbeth, and in Moby Dick, excuse me. So one of the criticisms of Moby Dick by some is that there wasn't any female characters in Moby Dick, or not any that played a significant role. I believe there was a sister to the owners of the Pequod who came in and helped prepare the Pequod for its voyage. But other than that, really no female characters, and definitely not any female characters that uh, influence the story in a significant way. However, that may be, Moby Dick does not lack the feminine. So the feminine meaning more, the capacity for receptivity, the capacity to feel, the capacity to love. That is, Moby Dick is filled with that. I reread Moby Dick recently for this talk, and I was somewhat surprised by all of the feminine imagery and and all the feminine feeling that exists in Moby Dick. So Melville definitely writes or has many images of objects that are circular, cylindrical, objects that contain, that support. So all of these things point to the feminine element. He one chapter called "A Squeeze of the Hand." It's about Ishmael, the narrator of the story, and kind of the central character, our viewpoint into the story, is working with the spermaceti of the sperm whale, and through this kind of mashing up of the spermaceti, he has a feeling of divine love. I would describe it he has this feeling of love for all of humanity. So in a way, it could be, the gospel according to Moby Dick in that chapter. But again, Melville, either consciously or unconsciously, has a lot of feminine imagery. Again, imagery relating to circles, cylindrical things, containers, circular containers, things like that. So the chapter I'm going to focus on is chapter 9, the sermon. So this is chapter 9 is about Father Mapple. He is a preacher in New Bedford, and this is prior to Ishmael out to sea, going out to sea on the Pequod with Captain Ahab. So within this, so he's and Father Mapple is using the story of Jonah, uh, and again to use another feminine image, he's talking about Jonah being in the belly of the whale. So a pregnant image, an image of pregnancy. And he shortly thereafter states, "What a pregnant lesson is this prophet." So I know it's a literary device to use that language too, but again, this does point to the feminine in Moby Dick. So within the sermon, there is a hymn. Uh, Melville includes a hymn. And the hymn starts out like this: I saw the opening maw, and the maw is, the mouth or the jaw of hell. Oh, I was plunging to despair. In black distress, I called my God. When I could scarce believe him mine, he bowed his ear to my complaints. No more the whale did me confine. So, of course, in the context of the chapter, this is referring to Jonah no longer being confined by the whale. But what was the whale to Ahab? So here's what the whale was to Ahab. The whale to Ahab was all that most maddens and torments, all that stirs up the lees of things, all truth with malice in it, all that cracks the sinews and cakes the brain, all the subtle demonisms of life and thought, all evil, were visibly personified and made practically assailable in Moby Dick. So practically assailable is that there was this object that could be destroyed. So that the white whale, so Moby Dick became the incarnation of all evil for Ahab. And in a chapter called The Candles, Ahab, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. So not only is Ahab defiant against what all that is evil, he's also defiant against all that is God. Ahab is the person who cannot accept suffering. That suffering that suffering is a part of existence. It's a part of it. There's no escaping it. I think, like I've mentioned in some of my other videos, and it's filled through the scriptures and tragic stories, is everyone is going to suffer, and they're either going to suffer on the physical level, the mental level, or the spiritual level. And I think Ahab, Melville is painted Ahab as a man who will not accept that. He will not accept something. He will not accept suffering, or that he cannot accept that something can cause him suffering. That something is more powerful than him. Um, so, in a couple of instances in Moby Dick, um, Melville paints Ahab's egoism. There's a chapter called the doubloon, and the doubloon is a Spanish gold coin nailed to the mast. That coin is to be given to the person who kills Moby Dick. On that coin are images. and many different characters come up to this coin to interpret what the images are, what they mean. And for Captain Ahab, he thinks everything is Captain Ahab. So through this scene, Melville is showing us that Captain Ahab is completely and totally, his consciousness is completely and totally identified with his ego. That there is nothing greater than his ego. There's nothing outside of his ego. I think in another chapter, he talks about, if the sun insulted me, I would hit it back. So again, the center of our galaxy, um, Melville says he is equal to. If the sun struck me, I would strike it back. So, and throughout the novel, Melville points to Ahab's moodiness, his frustration, his annoyance, his irritability about anything that goes against his will. So Melville does a great job of painting Ahab as being completely egoistic, completely identified with ego. And I think life for all of us is how to disidentify or not identify with ego. And this is typically done through suffering. Suffering either changes our ways, how we live physically. If we suffer physically, if we suffer mentally, it it asks us to look within to change our attitudes, the way we think, the way our attitudes towards life, towards ourselves, towards others. And then spiritually, that there's more, I think that there is more to life than this life. And so if you suffer spiritually, it's that sense of being kind of, I think, bored with life, or not finding meaning in life, or feeling lost. I think these are symptoms of kind of spiritual illness. Well, and lacking love, divine love. So these would be the symptoms of suffering spiritually. So all of these things, um, all of the negative things of life, Ahab sees in the white whale. And I think Melville plays with literary convention. We could say that Moby Dick is an allegory or a symbol within an allegory. But in a chapter, he's saying, no, Moby Dick is not that. That within Moby Dick, there is an intelligence that guides Moby Dick to purposefully attack ships and kill sailors. He's saying there's some malevolent intelligence that directs the whale to do that. Um, I can't. Maybe it's in the Moby Dick chapter, but he says basically that all things, human beings included, are but pasteboard masks. Strike through the mask. That there are entities, qualities that are greater than us. Um, but that they can only really be assailable by getting rid of that object that contains that quality. So for him, Moby Dick is that. Moby Dick is this super intelligence, um, this supernatural thing that he must destroy because it is greater than his ego. Okay. So again, what is Ahab's attitude? So I believe it's in the candles chapter later in the book. Ahab says, "O thou clear spirit of clear fire, whom on these seas I as Persian once did worship, till in the sacramental act so burned by thee, the dismemberment of his leg by Moby Dick, I'm guessing, that to this hour I bear the scar. I know thee, thou clear spirit, and I now know that thy right worship is defiance. So again, this is ego. It is the ego that defies God. And in the Father Mapple chapter, in the sermon chapter, Father Mapple talks about that. It says, if we are to obey God, we are to disobey ourselves. So essentially, we are to discipline ourselves. He says that is the hardest thing to do for human beings, is to discipline their ego nature in order to find God. But here again, Ahab says, and now I know that thy right worship is defiance. So this, and again, this has echoes to Milton's Satan. It is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So it's that same archetype. It's that same quality that perhaps at times pervades all of us. Um, that instead of surrendering to God, surrendering to the reality and truth that life is suffering, accepting suffering, um, one defies that, goes against that with anger, moodiness, the desire to have one's way all the time, things of that nature. So he says, "Thou clear spirit of clear fire, on whom on these seas." So I think these seas are, it is the duality of nature. So again, I don't recall which chapter, but this is what he describes the sea as: that these waves should rise and fall, ebb and flow unceasingly. For here, millions of mixed shades and shadows, the ever rolling waves, but made so by their restlessness. So here he's talking about really the agitation of consciousness, being restless by the dualities and the mixtures of nature. So just to touch a little bit on yoga philosophy, that nature has a dual nature and is kind of interwoven with three qualities. So there's an elevating quality. This is called the sattvic quality. This is essentially doing good. If you do good to yourself, do good to others, your consciousness will elevate towards soul consciousness and God consciousness. Rajasic, or the rajas uh, guna, keeps consciousness focused on the external world. What can I accomplish? What can I do? What can I obtain? What can I grab? And then the last one is the tamas, or the tamasic quality, and these are more of the demonic qualities. These are qualities that lower consciousness, that can lower consciousness down to a bestial nature or even a demonic nature. Okay, so these are the seas. This is what confines. Um, this is what we all, and this is what Captain Ahab was up against. Okay, and that Moby-Dick, within this fabric of nature, is that intelligent quality of nature that has choice, that can influence. Okay, it is that intelligence that supersedes the ego. So Ahab, through his dismemberment by Moby Dick, becomes insane, and there's a wonderful description of how that happens when he is in his ship on the way back home. Basically, how his convalescence and his suffering intermixed to make him mad. Again, Melville, I haven't seen prose greater than Herman Melville's in Moby Dick. It is astonishing. Um, yeah. And then I wanted to, so in King Lear, I mentioned that King Lear became a strong influence for Melville in writing Captain Ahab and Moby Dick. So this is from Act 4, Scene 6 in King Lear, and this is Gloucester. This is in the mouth of Gloucester. I think this is after Gloucester has been blinded. O you mighty gods, this world I do renounce, and in your sights shake patiently my great affliction off. If I could bear it longer and not fall to quarrel with your great opposeless wills. Opposeless wills meaning that we as human beings, we cannot oppose a God's will or God's will. So this, in a nutshell, Gloucester developed the right attitude to existence, whereas Ahab did not. Ahab did not renounce. He did not patiently shake off the great affliction. And if I could bear it longer and not fall to quarrel, Ahab could no longer bear suffering. He could not bear existence. This also has an echo later of Ivan in Brothers Karamazov, which was published after Moby-Dick. Um, and I don't know if Dostoevsky knew Moby-Dick or read Moby-Dick, but there are definitely some Ahabian strands in Ivan in Brothers Karamazov. So here's how the hymn finishes in the sermon chapter. With speed he flew to my relief, meaning God, as on a radiant dolphin borne, awful yet bright, as lightning shone the face of my deliverer, God. So again, we have deliverer, delivery. So here I think we have the feminine God or divine mother. And the divine mother is love. Her quality is divine love. My song forever shall record that terrible hour. I give the glory to my God, his all the mercy and the power. So here that hymn is talking about going to God, surrendering to God, um, knowing either consciously or unconsciously that God and the gods are a greater power than ego. This is what Ahab could not abide by. His ego, he thought, was greater than God or the gods. And that what led to uh, all of his physical, psychological, and spiritual suffering, and eventually his death. His inability to accept suffering. Okay, and then the epilogue of Moby Dick. So the first sentence in the epilogue is, "And I only am escaped alone to tell thee." So this is from the book of Job. And so, as other critics have mentioned, Melville is kind of pointing us to the book of Job. That's kind of the quote unquote sequel to Moby Dick. So that Ahab's suffering only led to more suffering, whereas Job's suffering eventually led to an acceptance of suffering by Job and a reconciliation with God. So Melville, I think in essence, is asking us to read the book of Job after reading Moby Dick. So I think I'll end it there. If you have not read Moby Dick, please do. It is the great American novel. There are parts of it that I have come to enjoy, but I completely understand if some people find it dry. Um, but even in what could be characterized as some dry chapters, Melville ends that chapter with a wonderful uh, philosophical statement, or just a wonderful sentence, you know. Um, and I think uh, Moby Dick is very strong towards the end. You know, I think starting it with chapter 106, maybe. Just some great imagery, some great writing. But there is great writing throughout all of Moby Dick and great chapters throughout all of Moby Dick. Um, I was going to go through a list of the chapters you should read, but just read the book. And Moby Dick is one of those books you have to read multiple times to, I think, to gain a full understanding. Well, not even a full, but an appreciation and an understanding of what Melville is writing. Um, Again, yeah, I think it is what Melville was able to do with kind of the Shakespearean threads and the Miltonic threads and probably the Greek threads, all the tragic threads that he was able to weave into Moby Dick, is astounding. Um, those are my thoughts on Moby Dick. Please let me know what you think uh, of of Moby Dick, and what are some of your thoughts about Moby Dick and Captain Ahab specifically. And if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Thank you all. Bye.